Well, welcome everyone to the Gubernatorial Forum on Energy and Environment, hosted here by our partners, the Environmental League of Massachusetts. My name is Annette Sawyer. I'm the Vice President of Education here at the museum, and we're thrilled to have you here. Welcome. For 188 years, the museum has dedicated ourselves to exploring our changing world, building the next generation of problem solvers. This forum represents one of our roles in the community, that of convening ideas and constructive, respectful discourse about the important issues of our time. And we're very, very proud to be part of a Commonwealth where both candidates support the advancement of science and building resilience in the state and in our community. Now, I've talked about constructive dialogue, and I may have pasted these few comments inappropriately, because the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is the emergency exits. And those emergency exits are here to stage left and up at the top. If you need to use the restroom or leave the auditorium for any reason, go up the stairs, exit at the top, and we have folks that will let you back in. The bathrooms are out and to your right as you exit. So welcome again to the Museum of Science, and it's my pleasure to introduce you all to Joe O'Brien from the Environmental League of Massachusetts. And thank you again for coming.
Good evening, my name is Joe O'Brien of the Environmental League of Massachusetts, and on behalf of our Board of Directors and our staff, we want to welcome you to the Gubernatorial Forum on Energy and the Environment. I have the great pleasure of offering just some quick words of thanks, a short disclaimer, and introduce our moderator. To start, we would like to thank and recognize Representative Frank Smizek, who has joined us, and a number of other elected officials joined us. I want to welcome them and thank them for being with us. We would also like to thank the amazing staff and the board of the Museum of Science for hosting us today. We are fortunate to have such a remarkable institution in our community that educates people about the importance of science and use it to advance the public interest. Third, we want to thank our partner organizations who have helped put together tonight's forum, and more importantly, with the work they do every day to protect the environment and help build a greener, more sustainable, and healthier Commonwealth. I'm going to read the names of our organizations. You also see their logos up here. Please hold your applause till the end. The Acadia Center, the Alliance for Business Leadership, Appalachian Mountain Club, Ceres, Clean Water Action, Charles River Watershed Association, Conservation Law Foundation, Environment Massachusetts, Green Energy Consumers Alliance, Metropolitan Area Planning Council, Mass Audubon, Massachusetts Rivers Alliance, Mothers Out Front, and the Trustees. Let's have a big round of applause for the good work. Finally, we want to thank our two candidates who will be joining us, first Governor Baker and then former Secretary Jay Gonzalez, for joining us tonight. Both candidates are outstanding and accomplished public leaders, and we thank them for the service to the people of the Commonwealth. I think it's also worth thanking them for the way they have conducted a spirited but civil and issues-oriented campaign that is focused on accomplishments, challenges, and opportunities to confront our state. In doing so, they enrich and strengthen our democratic process. And this then brings us to our purpose tonight, to hear about the vision and plans that both candidates have to ensure that Massachusetts continues to lead the nation in areas of environmental protection, renewable energy, and addressing the challenges of climate change. Our lawyers have asked me to read a quick disclaimer. Always important to do what the lawyers tell us to do. So tonight's event has been organized to inform the public about the views of all our state's gubernatorial candidates on a broad variety of issues affecting the environment. We have invited all the major candidates to participate. The sponsors of tonight's event are nonprofit organizations, and they are presenting this forum only to educate the public. They are not taking positions to support or oppose any of the candidates. These views expressed by the candidates tonight do not necessarily reflect the sponsors' positions. And now it's with great pleasure I get to introduce our moderator. Bruce Moll is the editor of Commonwealth magazine. Bruce came to Commonwealth from the Boston Globe, where he spent more than 30 years in a wide variety of positions covering business and politics. At Commonwealth, Bruce helped launch the magazine's website and has written about a wide range of issues with a special focus on politics, tax policy, and energy. Bruce is a graduate of Ohio Wesleyan University and the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and he lives in Dorchester, Mass. Please welcome Bruce Moll.
Come on up and settle in over here. I'm going to introduce you in a minute. Okay? How you doing? Good to see you. So I too have a few disclaimers to make before we get going.
So do I.
But I thought I might start off by just reminding us all why we're here. There was a report that came out earlier this week, and I'm looking at a story about it in the New York Times. It talks about this UN scientific panel on climate change, painting a far more dire picture of the immediate consequences of climate change than previously thought. And the report said that avoiding the damage requires transforming the world's economy at a speed and scale that has, quote, no documented historic precedent. Now for the disclaimers. These are the ground rules. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for an opening statement and 2 minutes for a closing statement. Each candidate will be asked the same questions and will have 2 minutes to answer each question. The moderator, that's me, can ask a follow-up question. That means I'm the wild card factor here. The candidate will be given 1 minute to answer that follow-up question. The timekeeper in the front row will raise a green card at the start of the time period. I think it's actually electronically done this time. It'll turn yellow when 30 seconds remain and red when time is up. Candidates must stop speaking when the red card is shown. Due to IRS rules on candidate forums, we will not be able to take questions from the audience. Questions for tonight were chosen by the sponsoring groups, me, and from submissions through Facebook and Twitter. All questions were shared ahead of time with both candidates. We ask that the audience please not interrupt the candidates and hold applause until the end of the forum. Anyone who interrupts the program will be asked to leave the theater. Wow, okay. So we're going to start off. Governor, you have a 2 minute opening statement.
Thank you, Bruce. And I do have a legal set of statements I'd like to make before I start, that nothing I say should be attributed to me or to my campaign. Let me start by saying that, first of all, I appreciate all of you being here, and I appreciate the work and the advocacy and the information that you bring to these incredibly important conversations and discussions and policy making. With respect to the issues we're going to discuss, and I'm sure we'll get into some of them later on, I think the most important thing I would say is that the issues associated with climate are not purely limited to climate. And what I mean by that is they cover a much wider collection of policy areas and decisions. And the one I'm going to speak to briefly in my opening remarks here is housing. We have a housing problem in Massachusetts. And for 50 years, we built 30,000 new units of housing every single year. And then starting at around the 90s, we started building about 8,000 to 10,000 new units of housing. And for 25 years, we've basically built less than half the housing we used to build every single year. And that's created a crisis. And the crisis looks like this. We don't have much inventory. The inventory we have when it comes on the market gets priced way above what anybody would have expected it to cost. That drives people of virtually almost every income level farther and farther away from some of those markets and the places that they work, which then means they have to travel much farther than they anticipated they would have to travel to actually get to where they were working. And people talk about the housing thing as an affordability issue. People talk about it as an economic issue. People talk about it in a lot of different ways. But when I think about the consequences of the current state of play when it comes to housing, I think about those things. I absolutely do. But I also think about it as an enormous environmental issue. And one of the reasons we worked so hard with so many people to try to get a housing bill through the legislature during this past session was because this one feels to me like it touches a whole bunch of areas, including this one. And the work that we do on all these other issues is equally important, but I would just start by saying that one of the things that makes climate and one of the things that makes decisions about energy and environment and transportation and all the rest so important is they cover a much wider swath of issues than people realize at first glance. And the one that really, to me, sort of crystallizes how broadly these issues cross is the housing issue. And whatever happens with respect to November and beyond, if I'm fortunate enough to continue to serve as governor, you're going to hear me talk a lot about housing in the context of environmental policy, which may sound a little odd. And one of the things I would say to all of you is that I think you should include that in part of your conversations when you deal with the legislature and with others. Thanks.
Thank you. So I started off with a really short question.
And by the way, since you gave me like a whole bunch of other questions about a whole bunch of other things, all of which I was planning to answer when I got asked, it didn't make a lot of sense to me to incorporate them into my opening statement, which is why I tried to go in a slightly different direction.
Makes sense. So I had a very short question. I was going to ask whether the T had enough money to do its job. And I'm going to ask that. It was short and sweet. But you and your opponent had sort of talked about that at your debate earlier this week. So I thought I'd try and go in a little bit different direction.
Oh, so now you're going to ask me a different question than the one you asked me to prepare for.
Yeah, it's the same question. But at the debate, it went something like this. Mr. Gonzalez argued the T needs a lot more money to bring its infrastructure into a state of good repair more quickly, faster than the 15 years that the T is currently projecting. You focus more on laying a sound framework for improvement by getting the transit agency's fiscal house in order and upping capital spending to a whopping $8.1 billion over the next 5 years, nearly double what was spent in the previous 5 years. Let's go a little deeper on your answer. The $8.1 billion doesn't include money for at least one high priority project, South Coast Rail. That still needs to be found. There's also no guarantee you will reach that $8.1 billion target. The head of the T's Fiscal and Management Control Board has indicated he is deeply concerned about the agency's ability to meet that goal. It seems to me that reaching that goal and going even farther is in many ways a question of money and manpower, having enough money to do the work and having enough employees to oversee the awarding and oversight of those contracts. It seems like the T during your administration has done a lot of the tough spade work for the T's future success. Why not go faster and farther, even if it requires more money? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, the discussion about the T has focused for many years on resources and not on policies, procedures, follow-through, execution, talent, strategy, and a whole bunch of other issues. And most of those conversations around resources have involved expansion. There's been very little discussion about the core system, except for the constant refrain about the state of good repair. I turned around a very broken health plan when I was in the private sector. And I remember saying to somebody one time that I'd never come across an organization that was as broken as Harvard Pilgrim was when I got there. And the T was way more broken than Harvard Pilgrim. Not even close. And Stephanie Pollack, I think, put it really well, Secretary Pollack, when she said, if you just give the T more money right now, all it's going to do is be like a bathtub with a big hole in the bottom. It's just going to run right into the top and right out to the bottom because it doesn't have the musculature or the capacity to actually do the work that people would like to see it do. And this is boring and it's not interesting, but it is fundamental to actually creating an MBTA that works. And a huge part of the work and the effort that we've put into that place over the past 3 years, with one exception, which we'll talk about on one of your other questions, was to get it to the point where it could actually do the work it was intended to do. It didn't spend $1.5 billion in available capital in the 5 years prior to us taking office. $1.5 billion that never even went out the door, that was available to it financially and budgetarily. That could have been spent on a lot of really good stuff. And the first time it ever spent $1 billion on its capital program was last year. And in that same year, it spent $867 million, the highest number it's ever spent, on reducing its repair backlog and hitting on its state of good repair. Now that $8 billion isn't a made up number. People spent almost a year figuring out how to incorporate the work that needs to be done to create the reliable, dependable transportation system that people around here deserve in building that budget. And everybody talks about, and I get it, the orange and the red line cars, and I'm very excited they're coming, and I think what the Patrick administration did by establishing that relationship in Springfield with CERC was brilliant, and I've said that 100 times. But there was $1 billion of infrastructure spending that needed to be done on the red line and the orange line to ensure that people just wouldn't be sitting in delayed and slowed trains that were much nicer than the ones they used to sit on. And that's why we just issued a $250 million signal contract. And there are literally $700 million of additional contracts associated with other elements, associated with the core platform of the orange, the red, the blue, and the green line, coming right behind them.
So your time is up.
I could talk all day about this one.
But,
In fact,
is there still a hole in the bathtub? It sounds to me like that's what I meant. The spade work has been, a lot of it has been done, of what you're talking about. Is there still a hole in that bathtub?
Secretary Pollack and the folks at the T need more people to actually hit this 5-year goal. They're gonna get it. I mean, I've said many times that I feel like Ahab and the whale when it comes to the T.
Where are you going with that?
As an environmental justice issue, I know you have a question in here about this. As an environmental justice issue, this one's for real. If you think about the bus system, which we've paid more attention to in the past 4 years than anybody paid attention to in the previous 10, most of the people who ride the buses are among those who need most of all to have a public transportation system that works. They also need one that spends time talking to local communities to figure out how to do things like create designated bus lanes, which we finally started to do after years of push and negotiation and a couple of pilots that worked, and actually changing some of the issues with respect to how the traffic lights work in the morning, where we've done demonstrations that have been able to prove to local communities that if you actually let the buses run, it doesn't screw up the traffic that's coming on the cross streets. And this is slow, and it's incremental, and it's painful, and I get that. But if you really want to create a system that works for everybody, the buses have a lot to do with this, which is why we've replaced a third of the fleet, which when we took office on average was 18 years old, and why we just put in an order for a whole bunch more. And when it comes to the rapid transit system, that third rail that we replaced after the winter of 2015, it was a disgrace. And we bought all the third rail that was available in the United States of America for the next 2 years and replaced it all on the red line and the blue line. We've been replacing tracks, many of which haven't been replaced in decades. And anybody will tell you has to be part of actually what you do if you really want to create a rapid transit system that works. And on the commuter rail, I said this the other day in the debate, and I got an incredible amount of grief for it. We've replaced 200,000 railroad ties that needed to be replaced. Boring? Yeah. Not interesting? Yeah. But if you want to take the speed restrictions in the summer and the winter off the lines that have been there forever, you got to do it. If we need to hire people, if we need more resources to hit that $8 billion and deliver on that 5-year plan, we will find them.
We need to move on to the next question, if that's okay. It's on transportation.
If you think I'm not going to talk about the T before the end of this meeting again.
The next question is on transportation and climate from the Environmental League of Massachusetts.
Good afternoon, Governor.
Good afternoon.
Nancy Goodman with the Environmental League of Massachusetts. Another transportation question. Transportation is the largest source of CO2 emissions in Massachusetts and across the region. Without meaningful transportation emission reductions, we'll have a really hard time meeting overall emission goals. As you know, Massachusetts has been participating in the regional effort called the Transportation and Climate Initiative, but we have yet to see anything concrete emerge from that process. As governor, what will you do to move this process more quickly and get us on a path to 2050?
So, first of all, we have been participating in those conversations, and they're difficult, and they're complicated, and they're much more difficult and complicated than the ones around creating RGGI when it came to energy. We have a Futures Commission that's being chaired by Steve Kadish that's going to issue a report on transportation in December. And the reason for that is I was interested in a lot of questions, but there were three in particular that I really thought we needed to get an answer to deal with this particular question you're asking. One is, what really is the realistic time frame around electric vehicles? And what are the things that we can do as a Commonwealth to nudge that process along? That's question number one. Question, is it 5 years, is it 10 years, is it 15 years? Or is it more? And depending upon where you sit and which study you read, you can get a lot of different answers. And that has a big impact about how we think about what we're supposed to be up to for the next 5 years. Second thing is autonomous vehicles. What really is the time frame around autonomous vehicles? How far behind the electrification of the fleet generally are they going to start to land? And the third is this question about where are people going to live and where are they going to work? And we've done a whole bunch of scenario planning around that, and I know they have as well. And that has real implications for how we think about how we use the transportation system generally on a go-forward basis. I happen to think one of the things we can do and should do is fund, I guess is a better way to put it, a lot of the charging infrastructure that's required to make it happen. Because one of the things that we've concluded about this is until you have a 300-mile radius on a charge, it's going to be very hard to get a lot of people who would otherwise choose to go there to buy an electric vehicle, or lease. And that means you have to figure out some way to create enough charging capacity that people will actually feel comfortable that they can only get 150 or 160, 180 miles into the game. The other thing I would say is we have some decisions to make in addition to the regional piece around transportation and RGGI. We have some decisions to make with respect to how we want to think about building codes and where we might be able to create more charging capacity in addition to sort of what I would think of as the freestanding stuff, so that we get more people interested in the opportunity associated with these vehicles, even if they're only doing 150 or 200 miles on a charge.
Next question is about environmental justice from Clean Water Action.
Hi, Governor. I'm Vic Mohenka from Clean Water Action. So across the state and the country, people of color, working class and poor people, and people whose first language is not English are disproportionately impacted by environmental pollution and climate change. The 2014 Executive Order, number 552, directs all state agencies to develop meaningful environmental justice strategies. Please name 2 specific examples of current environmental injustice in communities in Massachusetts and what your administration will do to relieve the burden on those communities.
Let me start with a T issue. Sorry. When we finally did the real groundbreaking for the GLX project, after 3 or 4 faux groundbreakings, Mayor Curtatone said this project was one of the most important environmental justice projects in a very long time. And I would agree with him on that one. And the work that people did to value engineer that project and get it back on the federal government's radar, and to get the $1 billion that was available through the work that was done by Congressman Capuano to get it released, was a ton of work and a lot of effort on the part of a lot of people. And that one in particular, I think, has tremendous potential to deliver on a promise and a commitment that was made a really long time ago around environmental justice. The two others I would mention, one is the program we put together around parks and trees. We've planted about 17,000 trees in gateway cities with many of our colleagues in the local communities and in the nonprofit world. And in addition to that, 17 of the 20 park projects we've done over the course of the past 4 years, which add up to sort of roughly 45 million of 55 million worth of spending, have been on parks in communities that would be described as neighborhoods that would benefit the most from this and for which an environmental justice tag would be appropriate. We also have the interagency group in place. The council is identified, and the job, a full-time position associated with this, is currently posted. And we're anxious to pursue additional work in this. And one of the areas I'm really interested in is trying to figure out a way to do a lot more around access to some of the efficiency and green energy technologies that are available, frankly, more often than not to people who have resources. And some of the stuff we've done with heat pumps, and some of the stuff we've done with solar hot water heaters, and some of the stuff we've done with solar panels generally in public housing projects and low-income neighborhoods, I would like to do a lot more of that, and I think we can.
Okay. Next question on water from the Charles River Watershed Association.
Hi, my name is Emily Norton with CRWA. Governor, failing water infrastructure threatens public safety, public health, and the environment, especially in terms of our water resources. Massachusetts faces an estimated $21.4 billion funding gap over the next 20 years for water infrastructure. Assistance to communities has been intermittent with small-scale grants and limited loan opportunities. As governor, would you support additional taxes or fees to cover this gap? And if not, what is your solution? Thank you.
Well, one of the ones that I hope we managed to figure out a way to get to yes with the legislature on is the proposal that was in the Airbnb legislation for the Cape. I was very supportive of that initiative for a lot of reasons, not the least of which was it was one that was developed locally and everybody on the Cape bought in on it, and it was designed to serve a very particular purpose associated with the nearshore issues that they're dealing with down on the Cape. But I couldn't sign the bill because, first of all, we would have defaulted on the Convention Center Authority bonds, and some of the other elements of it didn't quite do what I think people in the legislature thought they were going to do. My hope is that that will eventually get passed and we can do something with it. That type of initiative I'm interested in. We'd be happy to do more of them. I also think some of the stuff we've done with respect to the Clean Water Trust, and there's currently a $30 million appropriation sitting in front of the legislature on that, as well as the money that's in the environmental bond bill, which many people here helped us develop and advocated for, creates real opportunity to do additional work around water infrastructure generally. I also think there are some new technologies developing in this space, and I think it's really important that we not miss that opportunity to take advantage of those. And that's the sort of thing that is probably going to require some interesting relationships, not just with folks like you, but also with some of the academic institutions around here as well.
All right, next question on the climate from Mothers Out Front.
My name is Debbie New. I'm a member of Mothers Out Front, and I'm asking this question on behalf of my daughters Sarah and Ellie and all children. Attorney General Maura Healey issued a study that found that new gas pipelines are not needed for reliability purposes. At the same time, our legal requirements under the Global Warming Solutions Act and our commitments to the Paris Agreement both require us to more or less be off of fossil fuels by 2050. Given that we have to steadily reduce our consumption of fossil fuels over the next 30 years, do you agree that it does not make sense to expand our use of natural gas? And what will you do to ensure we do not waste billions of dollars on new gas pipelines or other major fossil fuel infrastructure projects? Thank you.
Let me start by just saying that we wouldn't have worked so hard to pursue the legislation we got enacted in 2016 if we weren't interested in moving us as quickly as we could away from fossil fuels. And And what's been particularly interesting to me about this, on both the hydro project, but especially on the Deepwater Wind project, is the impact that that project's had on the conversation associated with Deepwater Wind generally all the way down the coast. I don't think anybody thought you could get the kind of price point that we got out of that bid. That came in at a level that was deemed as very affordable. And all of a sudden, a tremendous amount of activity all the way down the eastern seaboard started to develop in a big hurry. And I actually think that one of the best, I happen to think that project's gonna be great for us, which is part of the reason why we agreed to chase the second tranche, for lack of a better way of putting it, on a go-forward basis. But I also think that project and the work that was done, the procurement that was issued, and the results that came in were so surprising to so many people that we now have states all the way up and down the coast who are suddenly interested in getting into the deepwater wind business. And I think one of the biggest problems we've had with alternative energy sources generally is we haven't been able to make the case that they're gonna come in at a price point that's consistent with what people are already paying. And that we are now over that hump to some extent on onshore wind, on deepwater wind, and on hydro. And I think those are really good things with respect to our ability to continue to grow that. The other thing I would say is we're the first administration to put serious money into storage. Over time, to really get the biggest bang we possibly can out of both wind and solar, we have got to come up with better answers and more answers and sturdier answers when it comes to storage. And that either needs to be distributed storage solutions or community-based storage solutions, but one way or another, storage needs to be a big part of this if we're ultimately gonna be successful in dealing with your question. And then the third thing I would say about it is we advocated for the Clean Peak standard in the legislation that just got passed. And the reason for that is most of the worst environmental and frankly economic energy that we buy, we typically buy during polar vortexes and other periods of really high peak demand over a long period of time, and they usually relate to thermal. And it is my hope that we can use a combination of storage and some of these other energy sources that we've developed to create big opportunities to save during low demand periods and use this to supplement our existing energy draw during periods of high demand. I think in the short term and probably even the medium term, most of the work we're gonna need to do with respect to pipelines generally is gonna be around modernization, safety, and what I would describe as sort of investment in the existing system that we have. It represents about 50% of all of our electricity, it represents about 50% of all of our heat, and the incidents that took place in Lawrence, North Andover, and Andover were a big signal to us to do a very big independent analysis of the physical infrastructure associated with pipelines in Massachusetts generally, and a big review of the policies, procedures, and practices that are involved in upgrading, maintaining, and making that stuff safe. And I really do think that's going to be our focus for the immediate future.
Just to follow up, does that mean you do not support any new pipeline coming into the region?
I really think the focus for the next few years needs to be on the existing infrastructure and ensuring that it's safe. That's going to be our focus.
And not new pipeline?
That's going to be our focus.
Okay, the next question is on climate resiliency from the Audubon Society.
Pardon me, there are no questions. 82 days, Governor Baker, majorities on the way to
I'm sorry, there's no questions from the audience.
Good afternoon. During those 82 days, you didn't take time to hear my concerns or visit my community. Why?
Good afternoon, Governor. Jack Clark, Mass Audubon.
Are we not going to hear a response from this woman who sat outside your office for 82 days asking about the Weymouth compressor station?
We did exactly what she asked us to do, which was we engaged the public, created a very aggressive set of clean air measurement standards that were consistent with our role in that particular incident, and it was deemed by the mayor and by others in that community as exactly what they were looking for from us.
So is that project not going forward?
We're doing the study that we said we were gonna do. And that study will be completed, I think, sometime after the first of the year. But that project and that study are interrelated. In the end, we don't make the call with respect to the project. We're making the call to provide the data and the information and the decision-making at the state level that's associated with our role in that effort.
Mr. Clark, why don't you ask your question?
Good afternoon, Governor. Jack Clark, Mass Audubon. As you know, Massachusetts has made significant progress on climate resiliency this year, but there are still no standards that require or enforce consideration of future climate conditions for new construction. What will your administration do to move the needle on this issue?
So, first of all, I want to thank you for your leadership on the Municipal Vulnerability Program. Sometimes the way you get to the big bite is you take a whole bunch of small ones. And for us, the opportunity through the executive order and now through the legislation that was passed earlier this year to require everybody to put together a municipal vulnerability plan and to then attach to it a hazard mitigation project is a gigantic opportunity, not just to learn, but also convert. And part of this is about, and I'll give you a perfect example of what I mean by that. We had this voluntary program in place, we had money associated with it to pay for it, and we were very aggressive about promoting it after we issued the executive order, and a lot of folks in this room helped us promote it as well. And we managed to get sort of 40 or 50 communities to come step up to the plate and participate in the program. And then we had 4 nor'easters in a row. And all of a sudden, and we basically said we now have a 2-for-1 sale. Everybody that comes in after we had the nor'easters will be interested in making sure that we get the work done between now and the end of the fiscal year with you. And we had 70 communities suddenly show up. We're now up to about 160 all in that have participated. But part of the reason they came in was we had been pushing them to play and pushing them to play, and they eventually decided to jump once they had a really good reason, which was called the impact of those storms. And I think from our point of view, those initiatives are going to give us the ability to do 3 things. Number 1, figure out the best way regionally and by community to deploy a lot of the resources and the assets associated with the environmental bond bill to deal with the issues around adaptation and resiliency. The second is to give us the ability to think a little differently about how we deal with Chapter 91 issues and how we deal with coastal zone management issues generally. And then number 3 is to come up with some guidelines associated with new construction. And I would expect and anticipate that that would probably happen sometime in sort of early to mid 2019. But the best part about that program and the best part about that initiative was it put it on the radar for a lot of folks in local government who hadn't been spending much time thinking about it. And by getting them into the conversation and into the dialogue, we now have a whole bunch of people who might have been inclined initially to resist some of the issues associated with this, a heck of a lot more interested in determining what happens next and how they get to participate and play. It's a big winner.
Next question is on the environmental budget from the Appalachian Mountain Club.
All right, I'm Heather Klisch with the Appalachian Mountain Club, and Governor, the question is this. Under both the Patrick and Baker administrations, environmental agencies have been chronically underfunded. Both administrations have failed to make meaningful progress toward the Green Budget Coalition's goal of 1% for the environment. What specific environmental line item or items would you increase in the upcoming budget?
I think, first of all, I apologize for not delivering on my promise. The only caveat I could offer on that, well, I'm not going to go there. I apologize for not delivering on my commitment. I don't like not delivering on commitments that I make. With respect to this one, I think what I would say to you is to be very particular and very specific, which is I'm mostly interested at this point in personnel, and that personnel would be at DEP and DCR. Those 2 agencies have a lot to do. They're going to have a lot more to do on a go-forward basis if you think about all the stuff we've been talking about with respect to resiliency, adaptation, and many of these other issues. And they did well in the fiscal 19 budget, but those are two places where we absolutely need to increase our head count with the right kinds of people into the right types of positions in a pretty serious way. The other thing I would say is when the results come in of the statewide review of the pipeline infrastructure, I would anticipate that we'll probably want to make some investments in the field staff and the investigation and inspection staff at DPU as well.
So the 1%, I've heard this mentioned a lot, that you made a commitment to that. Can you explain why you couldn't meet that commitment?
Well, when I said it at the time, the one caveat, which I didn't mention here, because caveats are just caveats, was I didn't know what the budget was going to look like or what we were going to inherit. It was a bad budget. Taxpayers Foundation and most other people said that if you put the 2 years together, fiscal 15 and 16, which would have been the second half of the fiscal year we walked into and the first budget we actually prepared, the total problem we faced was probably about $1 billion. And we worked our way through it, through a whole series of initiatives of one type or another. And we solved that problem, and we did a bunch of other things that were important to me and important to our administration, but we didn't get this one done. Just didn't.
Next question on solid waste from the Conservation Law Foundation.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being here, Governor. Alyssa Raymond Reed, Conservation Law Foundation. Recently, your administration allowed Wheelabrator's online ash landfill in Saugus to expand capacity and continue accepting solid waste incinerator ash for up to 10 years. It is located in Rumney Marsh, an area of critical environmental concern. This waste incinerator is the oldest in the country. Its emissions adding health burdens to 3 densely populated, designated environmental justice communities. According to Wheelabrator's data, about 80% of what they burn to create the ash is compostable or recyclable. In your opinion, why did this expansion get approved? How would you instead reduce waste and/or divert waste from dangerous landfills and incinerators in Massachusetts?
Let me start by saying that we do need to do some homework on the 80% thing, because nobody that I've talked to in my administration knows where that came from. So point number one is it would be good to have a conversation with you guys about where the 80% came from. Our people also believe that it's a 4-year permit, not a 10-year permit, and that it basically operates within the framework of the original design of the original landfill. There were 2 other issues that were associated with this that were important. One was, as mitigation for that 4-year extension of their existing permit, they made a $2.5 million contribution to mitigate a nearby landfill that was actually potentially creating some real harm on another watershed that was in the same vicinity. And we felt it was important to solve that problem as well, and we used the mitigation associated with that arrangement to do that. We're big believers in food waste bans and recycling. And as I think everybody knows, we've had a lot of success on the food waste piece, especially with the big institutional players. The recycling market is in a very odd spot at this point in time. And we need to work with our colleagues here in the Commonwealth and around the region to come up with solutions to deal with both the recycling issue and the landfill and trash disposal issue generally. I think one of the concerns we also had with respect to this particular initiative was putting all of that, not incinerating all that waste and just putting it in trucks and driving it to some other place in the country and putting it in a landfill somewhere else. Just didn't strike us as particularly positive environmental policy either. And I think folks felt that in this particular case, this was the best of the options that was available to us, recognizing that we're probably gonna have to do a number of things to change the way we deal with recycling and waste generally on a go-forward basis, given the changing nature of the world market there.
Next question on utility incentives from the Acadia Center.
Good afternoon, Governor. Deborah Donovan, Acadia Center. Many here tonight are working to achieve the dual goals of reducing carbon emissions as fast as possible and deploying advanced clean energy technology to bring greater value to the state's energy consumers. A leading example of getting it mostly right is our energy efficiency program. Massachusetts has ranked first in the nation in energy efficiency for 8 years now, and the programs have created over $20 billion in benefits for Massachusetts ratepayers and are on track to deliver over 1/3 of the carbon reductions we need by 2020. Unfortunately, the current business model for electric and gas utilities gives their shareholders a higher return on investments that are in direct opposition to reaching our goals. If elected, what would you do to modernize the gas and electric utility business models to better align with customer needs and the state climate policy objectives?
Well, certainly one of the things is to create a program that makes recoverable the costs associated with what I talked about previously with respect to charging stations, which has happened. But I think the big challenge on this one is actually going to be kind of expensive, and people need to think about how to do this in a way that maximizes the return on the investment, not so much for the folks that are doing it, but for the people who are going to be using it. And I'm talking there about on-peak, off-peak pricing, real-time data around usage generally, and the use of smart metering as a mechanism to encourage people to think really differently than they have historically about how they do this stuff. And I think the path forward on that is going to end up being built around targeted approaches to big use. Would be a big benefit to them and a big benefit to the system overall. And I think the major challenge that we're going to face on that one is simply coming up with the right collection of folks to chase first, so that there's demonstrated success attached to it, which will then make it easier to make it more broadly available generally. But there's no doubt in my mind that if you really want people to get strategic about how they use energy, we have to come up with a set of tools for them that they can use and understand and appreciate the benefit associated with doing it. And in addition to that, figure out a way to factor that into the way we pay for it overall, because this is not a small initiative. If you really chase the smart metering strategy all the way down, it's probably $1 billion over time. But the benefit associated with that, if people really understand it, take advantage of it, and use it in conjunction with a pricing model that's on peak and off peak, could be profound for both utilization, efficiency, and the system overall. But that is really where I think the big opportunity there is. And we're going to push it pretty hard.
So I had a follow-up question about utilities.
Yeah.
Do you think they're in the middle of a lot of these debates? Offshore wind, they were evaluating the bidders, and they were also bidders as well, as well as hydro. Do you think their role is too pronounced, or do you think it's about right the way it is now?
I think let's put it this way. The whole thing is set up around what I would describe as sort of a regional command and control system. I mean, if you go all the way to ISO, which basically manages almost all the issues associated with the rules of the game with respect to the New England region, they have, for all intents and purposes, sort of the primary role in ensuring that there are no brownouts, there are no blackouts, that there's enough power available to service the region and the residents and the businesses in it. And We are the largest user, but there are 5 other states that play in that same space. You go from there to the utilities, who have the fundamental responsibility for sourcing energy and ensuring that it gets to wherever it is it's supposed to go on the transmission and distribution side of things. And it's not a model. And so it's a model that starts with a very sort of top-down command control. This is the way it's organized, this is the way it works, right? And when you start talking about giving people at the retail level, opportunities to think differently about how they access energy, what they pay for it, and how they could strategically make decisions about that. Almost by definition, you're gonna end up in kind of a complicated and difficult space for some period of time. And I think we're probably heading into a pretty complicated and difficult space with regard to that, because you still gotta figure out how to keep the infrastructure you need to keep in place to serve the people who aren't going to be the sophisticated and strategic purchasers who have the ability to actually do a lot of the things that are associated with smart metering or storage or some of these other things. As you go through the process of trying to create a more distributed and what I would describe as sort of market-driven approach to this stuff. And I think the big question is, how fast can you get there? And I think some of that becomes a question of how good a job we do figuring out which players are most likely to move most quickly, how big a play do they represent in terms of the market overall, and then how fast can that be translated into people, businesses, residents, and others who may not bring quite the same level of sort of capacity generally to take advantage of those opportunities. And I think that's a big challenge, but that's the challenge, I think, for whoever sits in the seat that I'm in, and the folks on the team and everybody else for the next 4 to 8 to 10 years.
2 minutes to have your closing statement.
Well, first of all, again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I very much appreciate the chance to engage in the debate and discussion. I think what I would say to close is that these issues are incredibly important. They touch everybody, one way or another. They have a sense of urgency about them that if anybody doubted that we needed to be thinking differently about this stuff, the last 12 to 18 months, 24 months should convince them otherwise. We had 111 inches of snow in 25 days, 20 days after I took office. The polar vortex is going to show up at least every other year, maybe every year, as far into the future as you can get. You can just watch the heat map of the top of the world just push it right off of the polar ice cap and right down into North America on top of us. And we had 5 big storms, really big storms, here over the course of the last 18 months. Not to mention the storms that have affected so many other parts of this country and the world. And I think the biggest challenge that we face, and the way I think about this, is you have to build coalitions. You have to create opportunities for people to appreciate the benefits, both environmentally and economically, that are associated with some of the choices and the options that are in front of them. And you have to be what I would describe as relentlessly aggressive about it. And I'll come back to the MBTA as my closing analogy. Just giving the MBTA more money without figuring out how to make it a lot smarter about how it does what it does and spends what it gets, honest to God, would not have accomplished much. The biggest thing we needed to do with respect to the T was get it to the point where it could actually intelligently spend the resources that we made available to it, follow through on it, and execute on a game plan. And it is finally getting to the point where it can do that. And I sort of feel the same way when I talk about some of these other issues that I feel about the T, which is you can't wave a wand and get everybody where you want them to be on this. You have to figure out a way to get the people who are most likely to chase it hardest, first involved, and then prove to people that there's a big opportunity here and others will follow. And I think the fact that so many people have suddenly discovered deep water wind as a result of that procurement we did is a big statement about what happens if you actually prove to people that there's not just an environmental benefit here, but an economic one as well. And if we pick the right players and we take the right path on some of these issues associated with distributing some of the decision-making around the grid, the more people we get involved in that and the more organizations we get involved in that who find a benefit and can prove that it works, the ball starts to roll. And that's how you get a lot of these other folks into the game. And I think there's tremendous opportunity there. And I may have sort of an odd way of thinking about it compared to the way a lot of other people do. But I can tell you this, if we're fortunate enough to have another 4 years, you will have a much better MBTA. You will have a far more strategic approach to the way we engage people around opportunities to get really aggressive about modernizing the grid and investing in new technologies like storage and creating opportunities to truly play at the retail level in a way people have never been able to play. And we will create a coalition of local communities that are going to be wildly interested in adaptation and resiliency and are going to help us come up with the strategies and the funding and the mechanisms to actually pull that stuff off. Thank you.
On behalf of all the sponsoring organizations, thanks very much for coming here today. Appreciate it. All right, we're going to start with Jay Gonzalez in just a few seconds here, so please take your seats or retake your seats. Already there? So I want to welcome the Democratic candidate for governor, Jay Gonzalez. Welcome, Jay. And you've all heard me say this before, but for Jay's benefit, I'm going to read the ground rules just very quickly. You'll be given 2 minutes for an opening statement, 2 minutes for a closing statement. You'll be asked the same questions, and we'll have 2 minutes to answer each question. I can ask a follow-up question, and you'll be given 1 minute to answer that. The timekeeper is in the front row. See the iPad there? That'll tell you how much time you have left. Green card is at the start, yellow card, 30 seconds remain, red is when time is up. And IRS rules, there can be no questions from the audience, and if there are questions, as there were in the first hour, we're going to have to ask you to leave. And we ask that the audience please not interrupt the candidates and hold applause until the end of the forum. Jay, why don't you start with your 2-minute opening statement?
Thank you, Bruce. Hello, everybody. It is great to be here. I appreciate the sponsors hosting this event and all of you for taking the time to be here. I am running for governor because I believe we need a governor who's going to aim high, take on the big challenges we face, and make a difference in people's lives. And one area where we are falling behind is on taking on climate change and protecting our environment. I am an environmentalist. I have spent my career working on issues in this area. As a lawyer, I helped government entities finance clean water projects, land conservation, park improvements. As Governor Patrick's Secretary of Administration and Finance, I oversaw investment at historic levels in land conservation and urban park development during the Great Recession. I initiated the Accelerated Energy Program to green 700 state facilities in 700 days. And I provided the financing to build the pier in New Bedford that is our launching pad for offshore wind. Personally, I led the campaign to pass the Community Preservation Act in Brookline, which unfortunately did not pass. I served on the board of the Brookline Green Space Alliance. I continue to serve on the board of the Trust for Public Land. I care about these issues, and as governor, they will be a priority for me, and we will have an ambitious agenda. I want to say something about climate change in particular. The UN report that just came out showed that this is an even bigger threat than we thought, and it is more urgent. We will set ambitious goals, and we will work to get there. We will get to 50% renewable energy sources by 2030 and 100% by 2050. And we will take the steps we need to take to get us on that path. Because of my ambitious agenda in this area and experience, I'm proud to say I have the support of legislative leaders like Jamie Eldridge and Mark Pacheco, and to have just earned the endorsements of the Sierra Club and 350 Mass Action. So I'm proud to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
So I'm going to start with the first question, and it was, I originally planned to just ask you whether the T had enough money to do its job. And that is the question, but I noticed you and the governor debated that earlier this week a little bit, so I wanted to just use that as a jumping off point. And the way you answered that question in the debate, you answered it in the affirmative by saying it does need more money, and you're supporting a tax on college endowments to provide it. It's a position that puts you sharply at odds with the governor. But you've been a little bit vague about how much money you think the T needs and what you would do with it. Would you focus on improving the core service, or would you expand services? Would you increase fares, or would you keep them at current levels? What would you do that the current management of the T isn't doing?
So let me be clear about something, because this is a huge difference between Governor Baker and myself. We absolutely need to invest more in the T. Absolutely. Any rational person who looks at the T's finances cannot conclude otherwise. And it's not being honest to say that we don't need to. So, as you mentioned, Bruce, I have a specific plan to raise $3 billion of new revenue each year for education and transportation by asking the wealthy to pay their fair share. His plan is zero additional investment. And that is not going to get us to where we need to be. In terms of how much for the T, I don't have a specific amount. It will be a significant chunk of that $3 billion each year. And because a lot of what's needed is capital investment at the T, a lot of that annual revenue can be leveraged through bond financing to actually do a lot more in investment if we do it responsibly. The truth is we have huge needs at the T. A state of good repair backlog. We need to do both. We got to walk and chew gum at the same time, not just address the needs of fixing the T, but actually expanding the T, making smart expansion investments so that we're getting people off of our crowded roads, so that we are cleaning our environment, addressing climate change. We need more and more people to be using the T. We need to make it as safe and convenient and dependable as possible. And that is going to take money. So this is going to raise a significant amount to get us to the place where we're making some of these investments as quickly as possible. I will not accept Governor Baker's plan, which is we're going to fix the T. Nope, nothing about expanding, nothing about building for our future, building our economic growth, dealing with climate change, electrifying the T, which is something else we need to do. Fix the T in 15 years, and he hasn't even said how he's going to pay for that. It is totally unacceptable. We're going to be ambitious about this. We have to be. This is our biggest challenge.
Do fares need to go up?
I will not ask riders to pay higher fares for worse service, disabled trains. We need to invest. I've got a plan to raise $3 billion from the wealthy. That's where I am going to start. I'm not going to ask riders to pay more in fares for service that they can't depend on.
Okay, next question on transportation and climate from Ceres.
Thank you, Ann Kelly from Ceres. Secretary Gonzalez, thanks for being here. Transportation is the largest source of CO2 emissions in Massachusetts and across the region. Without meaningful transportation emissions reductions, we'll have a really hard time meeting overall emissions goals. Massachusetts has been participating in the regional effort called the Transportation and Climate Initiative, but we have yet to see anything concrete emerge from that process. As governor, what will you do to move this process more quickly and get us on a path to 2050?
So it is, I think 40% of our emissions right now come from the transportation sector. It's the biggest emitting sector. We have to address it with a sense of urgency if we're going to hit ambitious goals like I laid out in the beginning of my remarks. And we need to electrify our transportation system, and we need the source of that electricity to be clean. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to push carbon pricing. We are going to get that done either through a cap and trade approach or a carbon pricing approach. I will immediately call in the governors of our surrounding states in our region and try to get a regional agreement to do this together so we have the biggest impact as possible, so that we create the incentives that all the economists agree we need to get people off of gas and fossil fuels and move our transportation sector and our economy to a true clean energy economy as quickly as possible. So, and if we can't get the regional states to agree to do it together quickly, then we will do it alone. And Massachusetts will be a leader in that regard. We need to fix, improve, and electrify our transit system. And that's going to take money. And as I mentioned before, we've got one candidate whose plan is to invest zero, and one who's got a plan to raise $3 billion from the wealthy to invest in part to fix our transportation system. I also, with carbon pricing, I would want to make it revenue neutral for lower middle income people and businesses, but I'd want to use some of the proceeds from higher income individuals to make some of the one-time investments we need to make to expand and electrify our transit system. We're going to need charging stations for cars, incentives to move to electric cars. So that's some of what we need to do, and some of the place where I want to pay for it. The other thing we need to do is make our electricity clean. It's not going to do any good to move to an electric transit system if we're using dirty electricity. So we need to accelerate our transition to renewables. I want to eliminate the constraints on developing solar, like net metering caps, and some of the new charges the Baker administration has put into place. Make our renewable portfolio standard 3% growth each year instead of the 2% that exists right now. We need to be more aggressive and ambitious about this, and when I'm governor, we will be.
Next question is on environmental justice from Clean Water Action.
Hi, Secretary. I'm Vic Mohenka from Clean Water Action. Across the state and the country, people of color, working class and poor people, and people whose first language is not English are disproportionately impacted by environmental pollution and climate change. A 2014 Executive Order, number 552, directs all state agencies to develop meaningful environmental justice strategies. Please name 2 specific examples of current environmental injustice in communities in Massachusetts and what your administration will do to relieve the burden on those communities.
Thank you for the question. This needs to be a much bigger focus and priority. Disadvantaged communities who don't have political power have often gotten stuck with the disproportionate share of the dirty environmental impacts in their communities. So, and this is something I want to mention, environmental advocacy organizations, like many in this room, gave our current governor a D grade on. We're going to do better when I'm governor. 2 examples. The city of Chelsea. They've got jet fuel storage, lots of industrial sites, right on the water. This is a majority minority community. Sea level rise risks with climate change. They've got a lot they're dealing with. That is not fair. One of the things I'm going to do is bring back that executive order. I'm also going to pursue legislation to codify it so that we've got someone responsible in my administration for making sure the entire administration is focusing on these issues and taking them into account in policy making, and working to look at communities like Chelsea to look at whatever we can do to mitigate the impacts of what's already there and not compound them with future decisions. Another example, Pittsfield, where GE contaminated the Housatonic River with PCBs. It's affected low-income communities like Pittsfield and others. The river's still contaminated. They are right now, they just restarted a process to mediate a solution around how quickly GE should be remediating the pollution and whether they should be disposing of the PCBs on site or taking them off site as the EPA is asking them to do. The Baker administration decided not to participate in this mediation. My administration would actively participate, would actively ensure GE is living up to their responsibility to those communities, and we would make them dispose of that off-site instead of giving them the biggest taxpayer giveaway to bring 800 jobs to Boston that they aren't even bringing to Boston. We're going to hold them accountable for what they need to do to clean up the mess they made for the communities in the Berkshires.
Next question is on water from the Mass Rivers Alliance.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. Hello, I'm Julia Blatt from the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance. Failing water infrastructure threatens public safety, public health, and the environment, especially our water resources. Massachusetts faces an estimated $21.4 billion funding gap over the next 20 years for water infrastructure. Assistance to communities has been intermittent, with small-scale grants and limited loan opportunities. As governor, would you support additional taxes or fees to cover this gap? And if not, what is your solution?
Yeah, so the needs here are enormous. And this is an area where I have experience. I used to serve way back as outside counsel to what's now called the Clean Water Fund, which is the main source of financing water infrastructure improvements in Massachusetts. And I basically worked with them to develop their financing program. What I would do is leverage that experience to go to the Clean Water Fund and basically say, we need to change the way we're doing business to better leverage the resources of this fund to expand and accelerate the number of projects we're financing across the state, which are the underlying financing from them are rates that ratepayers pay and state subsidies that help subsidize them. Different options that I think we can explore are increasing the state's capital investment from its capital budget that goes to the Clean Water Fund to do more than just what the federal government, the minimum the federal government requires, which we could leverage to do more projects. I think we can change the financing model there. It's very conservative. We can probably loosen it up a bit to enable us to expand our capacity to do low-income loan financing, to low-interest loan financing to communities and increase the number of projects we're financing. The other thing is we can and should look at the level of state subsidy to make these projects more affordable for communities across the state. But I think it's a great tool that has some flexibility for us to make a big difference in the amount of water infrastructure projects we're financing. And that is the vehicle through which I want to work to address this need in a more robust way. Again, it's compared to a governor right now who, from everything I know, has absolutely zero agenda in this area.
Next question is on climate from Environment Massachusetts.
Ben Hellerstein, State Director for Environment Massachusetts. Attorney General Maura Healey issued a study that found that new gas pipelines are not needed for reliability purposes. At the same time, our legal requirements under the Global Warming Solutions Act and our commitments to the Paris Agreement both require us to be more or less off of fossil fuels by 2050. Given that we have to steadily reduce our consumption of fossil fuels over the next 30 years, do you agree that it does not make sense to expand our use of natural gas? And what will you do to ensure that we do not waste billions of dollars on new gas pipelines or other major fossil fuel projects?
Okay, I want everyone to listen closely. I want to make sure everyone hears the answer to this question. I will do everything in my power to stop the expansion of natural gas pipeline infrastructure in this state. Everything in my power. We don't need it, as you referenced in your question. It just will further our dependence on fossil fuels, which is the exact wrong direction to go. And as we were reminded very recently, this is dangerous. And we're having a hard enough time staying on top of the infrastructure we have, which is where our focus with respect to natural gas should be. We have approximately 20,000 leaks in our gas pipeline infrastructure all across the state. And it is contributing to climate change with the methane being released from all these leaks. It is costing ratepayers money to pay for gas that nobody's using. And it's, in some instances, unsafe, as we've been seeing. So I think we need to focus on accelerating the repair and replacement of our gas pipeline infrastructure, including pursuing and exploring innovative approaches we can be taking, like district-based energy sources, as a part of the process of dealing with these leaky pipes. But this is a huge difference between Governor Baker and myself. He does not oppose the expansion of natural gas pipeline infrastructure. In fact, he supports it and enables it. And I know this isn't totally under the state's control, but we're going to use every lever at my disposal, and I will yell as loudly as I can at the federal government and advocate for the values and interests of this state.
So, Mr. Gonzalez, this past winter, we had a stretch of cold weather that lasted for quite a long time, and we came close to, people say we had to burn an enormous amount of oil because we couldn't get enough gas into the region. Is your view, how do we bridge the gap until, I mean, we're very dependent on natural gas now, and it's one thing to say we don't need any more, but we're very dependent on it right now. How do you get rid of all that?
Well, so we're at a decision point. And one way we can deal with the energy need we have is build more gas pipeline infrastructure, which won't happen like that. Take a few years. We can invest in that, or we can invest with a sense of urgency and aggressiveness in renewable energy sources. And you know, one of the perspectives I bring to this campaign and to what I want to do as governor is a fundamental belief in our potential. We're Massachusetts. We have always been a leader. We take on big challenges and overcome them. And I won't for a second buy the fact that we can't move in the direction we absolutely have to move in, and we have to continue to rely on the same old, which is just digging a bigger hole for us. So I will not deal with the short-term pressures we face by pursuing a long-term solution that's a long-term problem.
Next question on climate resiliency from the trustees.
Good afternoon. Jocelyn Forbush with the trustees. Massachusetts has made significant progress on climate resiliency this year, but there are still no laws or regulations that require or enforce consideration of future climate conditions for new construction. What will your administration do to move the needle on this issue?
We will pass regulations and laws to make sure that we are taking into account climate change and future conditions for new buildings, but we're going to do more than that. The impacts are hitting us now. We all know that. We've all seen it. We're all feeling it. And the near-term projections of the impacts of climate change on Massachusetts are frightening. They're frightening. We have to get serious about this. So, I know the governor just recently is getting around to starting to develop a statewide plan. And there's a bond bill that passed that authorizes the investment in some adaptation strategies at the local level. But it's not enough. We need to develop a statewide plan as quickly as possible. This needs to be a high-profile, well-resourced state initiative where the state is taking the lead in not only developing the plan for the things we need to do, like building code changes and new requirements to protect people and property in this state, but also has some teeth to make sure that we can impose some of those changes we absolutely need to make across the state. This can't be a purely local, if they want to, if they get around to it, kind of thing. It's too important, and the risks are too great. So this will be a high-profile initiative of mine. And we will adopt a statewide plan that is thoughtful as quickly as possible. We will pursue the tools we need to implement it. And it's not enough to just have a bond authorization. As many in this room know, bond authorizations don't mean anything unless the governor decides to fund them and to make them priorities in the state's capital investment plan. And this has to be a priority, and it will be for me.
Next question, the environmental budget from the Appalachian Mountain Club.
Hi, Heather Klisch, Appalachian Mountain Club, and my question is this. Under both the Patrick and Baker administrations, environmental agencies have been chronically underfunded. Both administrations have failed to make meaningful progress toward the Green Budget Coalition's goal of 1% for the environment. What specific environmental line item or items would you increase in the upcoming budget?
So has everyone noticed I wore my button today? My 1% button. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm wearing a button that says 1% for the environment because I am committing as your governor by not later than the end of my first term, we will dedicate 1% of the state budget to environmental agencies. And we will make meaningful progress each year until we get there. That is a commitment of mine you can count on. This is important, right? And to the question, let me answer the direct question about which line items. I'm going to depend on my environmental agencies and experts to give me the analysis of where the key gaps are, how we prioritize them in terms of where we actually put the money as we're increasing investment. But it is very clear that DCR and DEP have been decimated. It's impacting DCR's ability to maintain our parks. It's impacting DEP's ability to keep us safe, to do water quality inspections. It's also, by the way, impacting staff morale and workload and their ability to deliver on really important part of what government does. And this is a very clear difference between the governor and myself also in philosophy about government. It was an end for him, a goal to be able to say he reduced staff in state government. Smaller government, right out of the Republican playbook, is part of what he is about. I believe government is our instrument, not our enemy. It's the vehicle through which we empower each other and support each other and protect each other. And the environmental agencies are a key example of protecting us and our natural assets. And we are failing at that right now. So when I'm governor, we will invest in it, we will get to 1%, and we will do it to protect us and to protect our natural assets.
So Jay, I asked the governor why he didn't live up to his commitment, but the question asked that the Patrick administration had the same issue. Now you were there in the Patrick administration, and these environmental agencies apparently were underfunded then too. I don't remember any numbers off the top of my head, but what was the problem then?
Well, one big difference between then and now is Governor Baker is governing during a sustained period of economic growth, and Governor Patrick governed during the worst fiscal crisis the state had faced in decades. The context was very different. And, you know, I'm not Deval Patrick, I'm Jay Gonzalez. I am running for governor now based on my agenda, and I am telling you what I'm going to do as governor. And this is a priority for me.
Next question is on solid waste from the Conservation Law Foundation.
Thanks, appreciate you being here tonight. Alyssa Raymond Reed, Conservation Law Foundation. Recently, the Baker administration allowed Wheelabrator's online ash landfill in Saugus to expand capacity and continue accepting solid waste incinerator ash for up to 10 years. It is located in Rumney Marsh, an area of critical environmental concern. This waste incinerator is the oldest in the country. Its emissions adding health burdens to 3 densely populated designated environmental justice communities. According to Wheelabrator's data, about 80% of what they burn to create the ash is compostable or recyclable. In your opinion, why did this expansion get approved? How would you instead reduce waste and or divert waste from dangerous landfills and incinerators in Massachusetts?
Well, it got approved because the Baker administration approved it. And I would not have, and I will shut it down. It is an affront to Saugus and the surrounding communities, and it is terrible from an environmental policy perspective and environmental justice perspective. We need to get out of the 20th century of solid waste management and move into the 21st century in a much more ambitious way. We should be a leader on this. There's huge opportunity to, through reuse, recycling, composting, divert tons of waste that's going into landfills and incinerators into productive use. And we're not being nearly ambitious enough about that. So I want to make sure DEP has the resources to not only enforce the waste bans that exist right now, but to help us be a leader on this, to develop an ambitious agenda around solid waste management that takes us into the 21st century, that does not have us replicating big mistakes of the past, and where we're being smart about how we're managing solid waste, because right now we're not.
Is it fair to say that cities and towns deserve some of the blame for this as well? I live in Boston, and you can put anything out at the curb and they'll come and take it away.
Yeah, so there are some cities and towns who are doing great work on this and are being leaders and are being innovative. But it's a hodgepodge, it's ad hoc. And we can't afford for it to be ad hoc. And this is where we need leadership at the state level. So this is an area where I'm actually excited about. It's weird to say I'm excited about solid waste. But I'm excited about the opportunity this presents for us, because I think we can make a huge difference And there's huge opportunity to do much better at this if we've got the leadership to do it.
The next question is on utility incentives from the Green Energy Consumers Alliance.
Good evening. Eugenia Gibbons from Green Energy Consumers Alliance, formerly Mass Energy. Many here tonight are working to achieve the dual goals of reducing carbon emissions as fast as possible and deploying advanced clean technology to bring greater value to the state's energy consumers. A leading example of getting it mostly right is our energy efficiency program. Massachusetts has ranked first in the nation in energy efficiency for 8 years now, and the programs have generated over $20 billion in benefits for Massachusetts ratepayers, and is on track to deliver over 1/3 of the carbon reductions we need by 2020. Unfortunately, the current business model for electric and gas utilities gives their shareholders a higher return on investment that are in direct opposition to reaching those goals. If elected, what would you do to modernize the gas and electric utilities business models to better align with customer needs and state climate policy objectives?
So this is a huge problem. The utilities have had outsized influence in preserving the system as it exists, which has all the problems referenced in the question. And we're going to flip the dynamic if I'm governor. We're going to make sure that the public interest is driving our energy policy, not the utilities' interest. And one thing I want to make crystal clear about my own loyalties is my loyalty is going to be to you, to the public interest on this. And I have demonstrated that by taking the step of taking the no fossil fuel donation pledge, and I'm taking no money from any fossil fuel company or any executive in any fossil fuel company, because I want to be clear about this. Now, here's what I would do. I would direct the Department of Public Utilities to open a proceeding to investigate aligning our public policy goals with rate making and utility incentives, so that we flip this dynamic that exists right now and move to a place that's more like where we are with energy efficiency, which has been very successful. We can do more there, and we need to do more, but we're not anywhere near this place when it comes to clean energy sources. The utility companies should make more money when they source renewable energy as opposed to building more gas pipeline infrastructure. And that's not what's happening right now. The other thing I would do is appoint people to lead the DPU and other of our energy agencies who do not come from the fossil fuel industry and who share my commitment to moving as aggressively as we can to a true clean energy economy, and who have the expertise and experience to deliver on it. The other thing I would do, these are kind of related, we need to increase oversight of our gas pipeline infrastructure. And we've got examples of that recently that show that we are doing a terrible job at this, and we've been allowing the gas companies to basically regulate themselves by taking a passive stance, by not having enough inspectors. I will increase the number of inspectors by multiple times and take a proactive oversight approach to this, because we can't afford not to. And the utilities' interests are more than just the public interest. Their interest is making profit, cutting corners if they can get away with it. And we're not going to let that happen.
I was curious, utilities help negotiate the contracts for offshore wind and hydroelectricity from Canada. Would you keep them in that?
I think the procurement process was crazy. They had every seat at the table. And the driver of the decision-making around this needs to be the public interest. Of course, they should have input into the decision-making process, but they shouldn't be the decision-makers with every seat at the table. I don't know how that happened, how we got to that, but we're going to change it when I'm governor.
So I'm going to ask one other question. We have time for it here. Congestion on the roads is a big and growing problem across greater Boston. How would you deal with it? And you've talked about the T already, what you want to do there, but maybe you could focus a little bit more broadly, what experiments you would try, whether you put a greater fees on ride-sharing apps. How would you deal with it?
So my mindset on this is we need to be open to everything. This is a huge problem in Massachusetts. We have among the longest commute times of any state in the country. People are stuck in traffic for longer and longer, and it's affecting people's quality of life in a very real way. And their pocketbooks. I think there's an estimate that it costs each commuter $2,000 a year in additional gas costs and lost time in other places. So we have to, big reason I'm running is to take on the big challenges we face and make a difference for working families across the state in a way they're going to feel. And this is a place where we need to make a difference for people. So there's some clear things we need to do. We need to make public transit more appealing to people. It needs to be dependable. It needs to be safe, reliable, clean, convenient. So again, Governor Baker has a plan to invest $0 additional into fixing and improving and expanding our public transit system. I have a plan to raise $3 billion from the wealthy to invest in education and transportation, not only in public transit to get to that place we need to be, but also to fix roads and bridges across the state, which also can contribute to slowing down traffic and where we are in a very bad place with the condition of our infrastructure. We need to also invest in making it easier and safer for people to walk and bike, which would get people off the roads, just like fixing our public transit system would get people off the roads. I believe we need to explore congestion pricing. There was a pilot proposal the legislature passed that was modest, which would have allowed us to test whether it worked. It wouldn't have increased tolls on anyone. It would have reduced tolls for driving during off-peak hours, and the governor vetoed it. I would have signed it. We need to try new incentive-based models like that, which small changes in behavior can make huge difference in terms of traffic and how long people are sitting in traffic and congestion. So the one other thing I'd say, as I said, I support carbon pricing. That would also provide an incentive for people to get off the roads and use transit and would have a congestion benefit as well.
Mr. Gonzalez, you have 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Thank you. So again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and everything all of you do to help push and advocate and making progress on these issues. We unfortunately are in a place where this is the place we're going to make progress. The federal government under our president right now is only taking us backwards on this issue and many other issues. And it's why it's more important than ever that we've got real leadership right here in Massachusetts. This is not the time for us to lower our expectations. It's time to raise them. It's not good enough to simply accept the world the way it exists and try to manage it better. We need a governor who's going to see the way the world should be and take us to that place. We need to aim high. And this is a great example and one of the prime areas where we need to aim high. And when I'm governor, we will. And the other thing I want to say is we're going to win this election. Don't believe all these pundits and polls and all this other stuff. As Ayanna Pressley showed us and other insurgent candidates right here in Massachusetts, and as we've seen in races all across this country, money and incumbency and special interests and pundits and polls don't decide elections. We do. People decide. I know I'm the little guy in this election. Everybody saw that on TV just the other night, right? Literally and figuratively, I know that. But I also know that time and time again, little guys overcome overwhelming odds when their cause is just. They aim high, work hard, and support each other along the way. We have a strong grassroots campaign and lots of momentum. But we need your help. I am asking for your support. Join our team. Vote for us on November 6th. Knock on some doors for us. Talk to your friends and colleagues. Put a bumper sticker on your car. Do whatever you can. Because I am 100% confident. With your help, we will win this election. and we will aim high again, and we will make Massachusetts a leader again, and we will make a meaningful difference for all the little guys out there. And we will take on climate change and be successful in doing so. Thank you very much.